Hello, everyone. So the Fed hiked 25 basis points this week, and the long end of the curve actually went down. So this is kind of just unprecedented what is happening. And as usual, at the start of one of these things, I'm going to go through some data just to get us going here whilst people come into the live stream. So thank you so much for tuning in this evening. It's going to be a hoot, I'm sure. All right, so let's get into it. So this data came out last week, I believe, or the week before, but it's the Canada Raw Materials Price Index. I want to show you the year-over-year number because it's kind of insane, but the Raw Materials Price Index reflects the prices paid by Canadian manufacturers for key materials, unlike the Industrial Product Price Index. The RMPI includes goods that are not produced in Canada. And I want to show you this because if you look at this, you can see that during periods of economic slowdowns is when this thing is really tanked. And it is really tanking right now. It's tanking really hard. So after consumer price inflation last year and this thing shooting up and being at like 42%, it's now down at a year-over-year level of 20%. And it's not just that. If you look at the IPPI as well, which is the Industrial Product Price Index, exactly the same thing. It's coming down. I mean, it's come from these exact insane levels that we had last year, but it's still coming down. And if you look at any time where this has come down before, it's been during economic slowdowns, like in 2015, after oil prices came down significantly, impacted the economy, 2008, 2009, 2020. We all know what happened there. You know, the list goes on and on. So it's pretty indicative of what may be coming in the future. And I just want to chat over a couple of things as well, because people were talking about in the comments this week on the videos. So Canada had this scheme to woo H-1B holders apparently, and it got 10K applications within 48 hours. So this was for tech people to come to Canada. I've never heard of the Indian Express, but it was interesting what they said here. So they said the Indian Express spoke with a former techie who came to Canada with considerable experience from India and abroad. However, he had to pivot after struggling to find meaningful employment in the tech sector. He is now a long-haul truck driver. Canada simply doesn't have a thriving tech scene to accommodate us all, said the techie turned trucker who chose to remain anonymous. Most so-called tech jobs here are in IT support for non-tech companies, basically one or two jobs per company. And those are the real low-hanging fruit. They are paying like ridiculously low amounts of money, and that's obviously just due to the saturation of people who are in that, who want to get that particular job. So it's kind of crazy, but it just goes to show that it's not all it's cracked up to be. You know, we're constantly hearing, oh yeah, it's the greatest place on earth. And now I want to show you this because they just brought out a digital nomads visa. There's no end to stop this immigration complete nonsense. So now they're targeting digital nomads. What a complete waste of money. An utter complete waste of money creating this program, the government jobs that were created by this program, you know, and digital nomads, are they going to come here? No, because digital nomads, they're looking for a lower cost of living generally, and generally they're a bit more clued up as well. So they're not going to come to Canada, which is one of the most expensive places to live in the world. I mean, that is just absolutely insane, as you can see by looking at the Expat Insider from Internations, where Mexico was top of the list and Canada wasn't even on the list. In fact, for personal finance, it was right at the bottom of the list. So it's absolutely insane. We've got, you know, this going on, the mass exodus, people leaving. So we got lots of stuff to talk about. I know lots of you have been talking about it in the comments, leaving comments saying you're planning on leaving, you want to leave, what can you do, all these different things. And maybe we can start a discussion on that as well tonight. So that's really interesting. And then, you know, I want to show you this as well, because this was kind of interesting as well. So Goldman Sachs profit falls 58% on consumer lending pullback. So Goldman Sachs reported significantly lower profit for the second quarter, hurt by write-down in its consumer and asset management businesses. The bank on Wednesday said quarterly profit was 1.22 billion, down 58% from a year ago. So all isn't exactly rosy in the banking sector by any stretch of the imagination. And if you go down here, it says that what caused it, essentially, Goldman says Wednesday that it wrote down $504 million of goodwill related to its consumer platforms unit. That unit houses, among other things, the specialty lender Green Sky, which is basically for renovations and stuff like that, and they bought them last year. But they took a $485 million write-down on real estate investments, predominantly commercial real estate investments. Now, we know the commercial real estate sector is in trouble. I mean, I know that well. I'm here in Calgary, where 30% of the offices are vacant. No matter where you are in the city, people think it's just a downtown problem, but it's really not. It's far, far worse than that. And at some point, you're going to have to pay the piper. And if you're looking for anything to read, I just read this book from the library, and it was absolutely fantastic book. So yeah, that's that, and that's pretty much what's going on. And then the preliminary numbers for GDP came out, and they didn't look good. June was a shrink, so we'll see what happens. It's likely to get actually revised down. The economy expanded by 0.3% in May, but they're saying it's down in June by 0.2%. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, economic growth slowing, and the US is more resilient, at least it seems, in terms of GDP. Now, in both countries, they both actually published lower deficits. So the government spending in terms of deficits has actually gone down a lot since obviously last year and the year before, during the height of the stimulus era, let's call it that. But it's kind of insane. And then if you look at producer prices, which almost always lead inflation, you can see that they're coming down, but still just really, really elevated. So it's kind of insane what's going on. So if you're in the chat, welcome. If you're watching this, welcome. If you're listening to this, welcome. And let me know what you want to talk about. If you have any questions, anything like that. I'm just closing off tabs, by the way. That's why I'm not looking at the screen there. Okay, let's get rid of this. All right, let's see what people are saying here. See it go right to the top and work my way down. This is a great question, actually. This is a fantastic question, because it makes the point about productivity. You know, what is the point in paying taxes? I mean, forget taxes. What's the point in working? What sort of incentive are you providing for workers to go to work and work hard and want to, you know, better themselves if they know from the get-go that they're never going to be able to afford a home? And that is a massive problem for society. And I don't think people really understand how profound that really is. You know, the real estate market, the way it operates right now, cannot continue this way. I mean, we're already at this breaking point, which is obvious to many of us. Some people are sat in denial, and that's totally fine. But the fact is, the main cause of the cost of living pains in this country is housing. It's housing related. Now, obviously, housing related problems, there is massive speculation that's gone on. There's been Airbnb, you know, there's all kinds of different things that have caused housing prices to go up. Immigration's a contributing factor, you know, Airbnb and other things that came in 2015 have certainly pushed that bubble even higher, because they have essentially provided places where people can go to make even more money to justify those higher prices, which were already in stratospheric levels. They blasted off into the stratosphere long ago. So, you know, it is a major problem. And I think that that's a great point. You know, what is the point in working? And that's why productivity has been falling since 2008, because if you pinpoint where this really started to 2004, 2003, around that time, so it was about 20 years ago, that's where you really started to see home prices just decouple from incomes. And it and that's when you basically have a bubble, when they just decouple from fundamentals. And, bubbles are often times where there is a lot of mania in the market, like we've seen during 2021. That was probably the peak of it, but we definitely saw a rush of that come back. And I know a lot of people don't want to get on Twitter and stuff like that, but I love Twitter because I love reading what people are writing on Twitter. I don't even follow anybody, but it just populates my feed with stuff that I'm reading. And you just get such a good barometer on what people are thinking, realtors, people who want to buy homes, people who are generally pissed off with the way things are right now. And it's very obvious to me, at least, that everybody is pissed at the current situation. So, it can't continue. I don't think we can sit here and say that the Conservatives are going to come in and they're going to change all this when they were part of this. If you figure this bubble has been going for 20 years, all governments who are going to be voted into, who have been in power and will be voted into power in the future, they have all been part of this. So the NDP, the Liberals, the Conservatives, they've all been part of this. So to say, I kind of hate it because you see the politics of it all. It's just all about fucking attacking one another. Nobody wants to actually get things done for the country. It's all just about power. It's all just becomes a power struggle. And you see that you see that kind of go down when you read a book. Like, that's why that book I read was so fascinating. I'm going to be reading a book on the English Civil War and kind of what happened before that and everything like that as well. I just love history. It's fascinating. But, to see the Roman Empire also had the same struggles, it's kind of baffling to me. That when you're in those end stages is when you have massive wealth divides, political divisiveness, and all those different things. So it's interesting. Anyway, great comment, question, whatever it was. Okay. Yeah, so I've heard about this global boiling. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to really get into the climate change debate and everything like that, but yeah, I mean, it's obvious that the climate is changing. How you pinpoint on what has caused that change, people have various different views on that. I'm not going to get into it. But, it is very evident right now that we're seeing like increased fire activity. I mean, since we've been here in Western Canada, it's just insane, the amount of wildfires, the amount of wildfire smoke. I mean, it's going to be essentially unlivable in probably 10 years because of the smoke. I mean, I don't know who would want to live here right now, even because of the smoke. I mean, we've been plagued by at least 6 weeks of our short summer here in Alberta with smoke, and you don't get very long anyway in summer in Alberta. They're pretty short. To then have it filled with smoke is another thing entirely. So, yeah, I mean, obviously the world is heating up and major problems with that. What caused that and whether it's part of a cycle, how much of that is human influence is all a debate. And I think the debate really centers right now around things like the World Economic Forum and political and corporate interests, which is just, I mean, it's like the green agenda right now. It just makes a lot of the stuff that they're pushing makes zero sense, like this electric car. Complete fucking nonsense. I mean, if they were actually serious about tackling climate change and they wanted to get people into like a green vehicle, then they'd be exploring more in the direction of hydrogen. They wouldn't be exploring electric vehicles. I mean, as you guys know, the amount of minerals that are needed to be put into these electric vehicles makes them incredibly dirty. And where all the lithium comes from these dirty places. Water is being siphoned off away from communities and they're being left to die in places like Bolivia to get the lithium. And this is stuff that's not talked about. And, the green agenda just seems a wild one to me anyway. But yeah, let's move on from that because I'll get pissed. uh, okay, let's see what we got. So Henderson said, I won't be able to make it for the live event. Perhaps this would be a good theme for the whole episode, but what are the 10 biggest reasons not to live in Canada? And what I'll do, I'll bring up the chat so I can see currently what you're saying. And let me know, what are your biggest reasons for not wanting to live in Canada? Obviously, I think it centers around housing and the cost of living. And then there's the politics as well. It's so damn toxic. And, you know, when it comes to the politics, you could say, well, wherever you're going to move, you're going to have political problems. And it sort of depends on the amount of tax that you're paying into the system. I mean, when you're paying so much tax as you are into the system in Canada, and you just see them just wasting it and just doing like ridiculously stupid things that even a 10-year-old could do a better job. And you can't do anything about that. Like, you can't change that. There's nothing that we can do to change it. So we have to change our situation and boycott the thing, in my opinion. So people are saying Trudeau. Pissed off we are. Wokeness, yeah, I mean, that is a major problem. What is happening in schools now? What is happening in Hollywood movies? It's just disgusting. The things that societies like Canada are trying to teach is normal is going to screw society in the long run completely. And you know, I have to be careful what I say and kind of speak cryptically about that, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. And yeah, lots of taxes, and obviously the taxes we know are only going to go up from here. And even if they don't go up, then what is going to go up is it's going to be inflation. So, all right. Let's see what we got here. I'm just reading your comment, Michael, about me powdering my nose. Yeah, you know, that is a great freaking question. Considering what's happened with the finances of Canada, why is she still finance minister? And I think she is going to be the person replacing Trudeau. Now, to all of us, that might seem like a mistake. I have no idea. But she seems like definitely the next person that's going to be pushed to power. I mean, if they do that, then they obviously have no idea and they're completely out of touch, which we know they are. But yeah, why is she still the Minister of Finance? Considering how bad the country's finances are, not only with the deficits, but with the cost of living, with consumer price inflation, with the fact that so many small businesses are right on the edge, 250,000, just because of this stimulus program that is coming to an end. And, you know, it just shows how weak the economy really is. And she's the so-called finance minister. But the problem, in my opinion, is that government is way too big in Canada. It's just this massive entity. It's like over 40% of spending now in the economy. It's just absolutely ridiculous. We're going to end up like England, where it's over 60% of spending is somehow linked to the government. So it's all these, so yeah, there's loads of private businesses, but they've all got contracts with the government. You know, the government's paying them in some way, and it's just ridiculous. And people wonder, back in the UK, I'm often talking to my family and I'm going like, what are you doing? Like, I mean, people in the UK are very set in their ways. Anybody will know that who has family or whatever in the UK will know how people are pretty set in their ways. People in Canada are pretty open-minded. Like, people move around, they move provinces. It's the same in the US, and I think it's just because they're larger country. So people are more open to moving, even moving country. It's not so much of a big deal. But in places like the UK, people are pretty small-minded, in my opinion. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like, when I went back there earlier this year, the country is in a freaking depression. Like, it is a horrible place. Canada is heading to the same place, which is depressing in itself, but it's not there yet. But it's doing everything the UK did to get in that position. And that's what pisses me off so much, is because I'm like, man, I moved here to better myself. I saw the country when it was in a better state. And I've witnessed like the fastest decline of a country that I've ever seen in my life. And yeah, it's just kind of maddening at this point, to be honest. We could add that to the list of reasons to get out. Oh, all right, let's see what. Yeah, economic migrants living off our tax dollars sums it up well. Well, economic migrants, I mean, that means people who are actually coming to like have a job and everything. I think you're talking about refugees and asylum seekers. And there's definitely a big problem with refugees and asylum seekers abusing the system. There's major problems with that in Canada. You've only got to look up the Rocks and Roads situation, the amount of refugees and the increase in refugees coming to Canada. I mean, I think that each country kind of has a duty, because they cause a lot of the problems, believe it or not, that happen in third world countries, to take in some of these people. But, there's a limit. There has to be a limit, especially when you can't even look after your own people, to then be bringing in more people. I mean, they're on the streets right now, but this has been a problem for years. It's just a visible problem now. So it's in people's front cortex. But, it's kind of crazy. The Ukraine situation especially annoys me because it is racist. Like, it's so obvious. Nobody talks about this, but it is the most racist thing I've seen the Canadian government actually do. Is they basically started prioritizing Ukrainian refugees over people from other countries, other war-torn countries. And that just infuriates me. I can feel my blood boiling up right now. My veins probably popping out of my head and everything like that. I gotta laugh, because otherwise I'm just gonna explode at this point. But it just drives me absolutely mental. It really does. And I have nothing against the Ukrainians at all. And I think the conflict is wrong. And I think Putin is a dictator. But I think Ukraine in itself is not a perfect country. I mean, it was the most corrupt country, one of the most corrupt countries in the world before this war started. And then suddenly, guess what? It changed. Just like the definition of recession changes when it suits them. And, it's just being used as a proxy war. But the thing is, to actually say, you know what, we're going to prioritize these people from Ukraine because it's good press for us. It's virtue signaling. And you're literally segregating people based on where they come from. I mean, that is literally racist. And you can even go down to the race, because predominantly people coming from the UK are white, whereas other refugees and asylum seekers are not white. So, and I just laugh at the Canadian government, because they're the ones who constantly say, we're all about diversity. Racism is bad. Trudeau has the audacity to call the truckers racist when his government is one of the most racist in the world. He himself is blackface. Like, it's a pure hypocrisy. And I think this is what just drives me nuts. It makes me want to leave. I think if I'm reporting on it from outside the country, I'm going to at least think afterwards, you know what, I'm not paying taxes into that system anymore. So, I can just view it from the outside perspective, which I think is better anyway, because you lose that emotional bias, which I have right now, definitely towards the Trudeau government. So, yeah, I mean, kind of crazy what's going on with that. But yeah, I saw it as something like hundreds of millions that they upped into a program for the recent amount of migrants that were on the streets in Toronto. And you know that Quebec buses them down. Like Quebec won't take them, but they'll bus them to Toronto. And it's exactly like in Montana where they're giving bus tickets for the homeless to go to Oregon and Portland and places like San Francisco. It's just absolutely insane what goes on. And people don't even realize, they think they're dealing with the problem better in different places. And it's just because they're moving the problem. I mean, you see that especially with the green agenda and electric cars, because you're just moving the problem from another place. It just goes to Bolivia or somewhere else where you're going to screw those people over. So anyway. Digital idiot visa, somebody said. Oh, that's funny. No immigrants in Alberta. Thank you. Stay in Ontario. I see why people have that resentment for immigrants, because it's just like, there's so much bad press with immigration, especially right now. But I think immigrants do bear the brunt of the blame for a lot of things in terms of the mainstream media. I mean, I'm an immigrant myself, but I think that the mainstream media is wrong a lot of the time. And this is a classic story that we see play out with immigrants and poor people being blamed for all the problems. When who is it? It's really the elite. It's really people at the top, the oligarchy in Canada, and different things like that are responsible in some ways as well too, possibly more. So it's definitely a complex structure. Hey Luke, do you think the government will bail out homeowners if the bubble curiosity of taxpayers' dollars? Okay, so you're just saying about a housing bailout. Um, I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, let's change that question to, can they afford to bail it out? And the answer is, of course, no. So with consumer price inflation, I would think that maybe would stop them doing it. I mean, you have to ask the question, if they were going to do something, why wouldn't they have done it now? And, the US government came in to try and save the housing market, and they were too late. And I think it will be the same in Canada. So, yeah, they may come in, try and do different programs, different things. I think it's inevitable that they'll try and do that. But you have to realize that a lot of the things the government does actually means fuck all. Like when it's all just virtue signaling. And that's what all the Trudeau government is about. It's just about saying, yeah, we care. Here's this program that's going to do absolutely nothing for you, but makes it sound like we're doing something. And then people are like, and then the Trudeau voters are like, yay, yippee, they're doing something. I don't know what goes through their head. I mean, yeah, I can see why the political divide just gets further and further apart as well, because it's just so hard to get into that mindset and figure out, like, why on earth would you vote for this guy after everything he's done, even if you were a liberal person? I mean, yeah, it just baffles my mind. Nomans are heading to Mexico, high cost of living. Digital. Oh, wait. What is the PowerPoint of the Palm Technocratic Digital Future? I'm not even sure what that is. That is a great question. What's your opinion on the growing attack on men, masculinity, and the loss in quality relationships and family, promiscuity and divorce, catalyst for economic ruin? Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, any time in history where you see like cultures just get diluted down to nothing, then essentially that just leads for a dictator to come and get in charge, or there's a civil war. So we're either coming towards a dictator, which might not happen for, 10 years or something like that, but we sure got close with Trudeau. I mean, you could argue he is actually a dictator. I know a lot of people don't want to admit that, but there's a solid argument that he is a dictator, considering what he did wielding power around with the Emergency Act. But what he's done by actually using that act, and he hasn't even realized the significance of it, is it's like when the Senate used powers back in the Roman Republic. Once somebody used that extra power, guess what? That led for the next person to use that extra power for what they wanted to do, for their power purposes. So it sets a dangerous precedent. And when it comes to masculinity and things that are happening and men are being attacked, especially, obviously we know that with this woke agenda specifically as well, and they're trying to dilute the culture down. They don't want us to be men anymore. I think it's absolutely terrible, and it shows a reversal in what has happened with actually human psychology and how we're operating as human beings. Because in the past we have exploited the strengths of each sex. So essentially, what a lot of women can do a lot of things better than men can, and men can do a lot of things better than women can. But now we're just saying, you know what, everyone is equal. Screw those differences. Screw the fact our brains are completely different. Screw the fact that the hormones we have in our bodies are totally different. Yeah, we're just going to pretend like we're exactly the same, and then we're going to expect the same result in society when it comes to productivity, when it comes to civil and social unrest, and everything like that. I mean, I think it's true. I think it's just, it's people are just delusional. It is crazy where we are heading in society. And it's not just Canada. This is happening in the Western world to a large extent. But you know what? If you go to a place like Mexico, guess what? You don't have all these problems. If you go to a place like Panama, you don't have these problems. You go to a place like Colombia, you don't have these problems. It's Western countries where this is a problem. So let's be clear here. But you go other places, it's really not so much of an issue. It's really like back to the past, which is better. And obviously there are some things in the past that weren't so good that maybe we could change and move forward in a different way that would be better. We need to move forward using each sex's obviously advantages, the things that we can do better. I mean, for example, with trading, because I do short-term trading, I also do long-term trading. But statistics have been published, there have been many studies, and women are better traders than men. And I'll happily admit that as a trader myself. Women are better traders than men. However, men dominate the industry. And the reason is women are actually much more compassionate, and that comes down to their hormonal base. So when you boil it back, that's the reason they don't have this egotistical nature that men have, which goes into their trading and I have to win and all this arrogance and stubbornness that men typically can have when they're put in the environment of trading, which is, there's a fine line between trading and a casino. Like the stock market is at large a casino, viewing it as a normal person. You really have to just find ways in where you can tilt probabilities in your favor like a professional gambler. But it's an incredibly emotional and complex thing to do. And I think when you look at how women and men are different when it comes to trading, because I've looked at this in detail, because I've looked at everything when it comes to trading. Because I used to be, many years ago, a terrible, awful trader, because that's the only reason. I'm not a great trader by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just learning and learning and learning, and hopefully I'll just become better and better and better, and that's all I can really do. And I'm really junior in my career, I believe. Like 5-6 years is nothing for this, I don't think. So Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but you can see how that works for any profession, like whether it's engineering, policing, whatever it is. And obviously, there are women that are more egotistical. They're more masculine than they are feminine. And there are different because everybody's different. So you can't treat everybody like they're the same as well. But, it's just saying that we should just all act like everybody's the same. We shouldn't embrace everybody's difference, try and do what we all do best, each individually, instead of trying to measure everybody the same way. It's a recipe for ruin, in my opinion. And I think that shows how bad things are really getting in Western culture, that it's come down to that, because it's just awful. Anyway, sorry about that. Sorry about that rant. Heading to Mexico, neighbor says, I'll be a gringo. Seriously, told him to look around. Well, I mean, there's a lot of gringos, so I think you'll blend in quite easily. Although, where are you going, Keith? Let me know in the chat and I'll... What is your outlook on Turkey and its prospects for moving there? I'm from Toronto. I haven't really done much research on Turkey, so there's nothing I can really say of value. You'll get more value from Google. But yeah, I don't really know about. I know about their monetary policy has been utterly bizarre, and they've been dealing with massive inflation and everything like that. And the lira versus an ounce of gold, for instance, is like absolutely insane. Just look at that chart. In fact, maybe we should get it up. (1% of people). 1% of people earn 180K or more. You can only get half a house with that money if you do the mortgage with the Canada stress test. That is a great point, actually, Paul, because basically you're illustrating the point which I've been trying to make, and I think people, not everybody, most people get it, but a few people have misconstrued what I've said when it comes to immigration. They think that I believe that immigration didn't contribute to the housing bubble, which is totally wrong. I think immigration has played a role in the housing bubble, but to say it's playing a role right now, considering the data that we know of people coming, we know what they're bringing. They're bringing average like $40,000, $50,000 worth of savings. They're not going to buy a home with that. The average income they're getting is 30% less than a Canadian. It's around like $38,000, which is just insanely low. So they're not buying a house with that. And then if they are living with 8 other people, well, there's going to be significantly less demand on housing stock, that's for sure. Because if you've got an average of 8 people in each household of the immigrants you've got coming to the country, guess what? You need nowhere near as many houses as people suggest in the mainstream media and everything like that. So I think there's a large component of fraud to this market. And then the other side of this is you've got the leveraging effect. That what has happened is the banks in Canada started allowing people, specifically around 2015, 2016, the rules just got really lax on this. Maybe it was because of the economic downturn. They kind of seized the opportunity. Maybe it was because some bank regulation changed when Trudeau got in charge. I have no idea, but that's when things really seem to heat up in terms of Canadian banks allowing people to leverage upon leverage upon leverage. So basically withdraw money from their property, go buy another property, then use the leverage from that property to go and buy another property, and just stack properties behind each other. And also banks would take proposals in, private lenders especially would do this, where somebody would come to them and say, hey, I want to borrow this mortgage. We went through about a year ago. It was an Uber driver, I believe. I think it was an Uber driver. It was around December because we were in Bucerias at that point. I remember doing that live stream because it was a complete shit show. And the whole thing was cutting out and the words weren't synced and everything like that. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, we were talking about how this guy in Vancouver who earned like $70,000 was buying like a $1.8 million home. Well, how was he doing that? He was using a private lender, and he was saying that he was going to rent out the basement as a secondary suite. So, they've took proposals on this and said, you know what? Yeah, you know what? And this is what typically happens in a bubble. It's just how low are they willing to go? And at what point does the economy break? And then everybody is caught swimming naked. That is what a bubble just boils down to at the most basic level. And I'm trying to keep it more basic because the financial media, all the so-called quote unquote experts out there, they all try and point to all these narratives. But as you said, Paul, you've correctly pointed out that barely anybody can afford to buy these homes. So how on earth are they doing it? And it comes down to those two things, really. But it boils down to the psychology, because you have to be a complete moron to take that kind of risk. And I mean, to take that kind of risk in this environment as well, where you're talking you can get a treasury at 5.36%. Today's rate, 5.36% on a 1-year treasury. And I think the 2-year is around 5% as well now. So, you can put your money in treasuries and it's pretty much safe. I mean, if the US government goes bust, it's like Armageddon. So I wouldn't even, I mean, it's not riskless, but the risk of the US government going bust, not really going to happen, in my opinion, even though you keep having these, debt ceiling, and they keep obviously increasing the limit. So yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting point, but a lot of it is fraud as well. There's many different things, but you have to boil it down to the basics, which is how and why would you buy a house in this environment? And it's because people think it's their card to get them rich. And for 20 years, they've been right. So in some ways, I kind of don't blame them. I mean, unless you looked at the data of what's happening with the underlying economy, you might be fooled. You really might be. But the reality is, it's just a Ponzi scheme. It really is. So, all right, let's continue on here. Great question, point. It's X, not Twitter. God. I don't drink coffee a lot, by the way, at all. I'm just so tired today. And I got my Panamanian coffee, fresh coffee, to keep me going through this. And by the way, actually, I'll just quickly share with you a personal story. Basically, unfortunately for us, I mean, couldn't have come at the worst time, but I don't blame our landlord by any stretch of the imagination. He's selling the house that we live in right now. So we've already secured our new place and we're moving. We're going to be moving by the next live Q&A that we do. We'll be in the new place and whatever. And I'll be able to speak more freely about the process because, oh my God, it's just been fascinating because having reporting on all of this stuff on the channel, seeing what's happening in the economy, and then to kind of be put in the middle of this process, even though it's completely shit for us, because, obviously our rent's going to bump up again. I mean, we were already paying high rent anyways because rents had gone up. Our landlord hadn't held back on rent increases, but we're moving to a new place. And, I found out because we were applying to different places. I was speaking to many landlords and I was asking them, how many applications you got, what's going on, blah, 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 trying to get an idea of what was going on in the rental market. And they just can't find good tenants. So, yeah, there is unbelievable demand in Calgary for rentals right now that you wouldn't believe. But for quality tenants that have good credit history and everything like that, forget it. There's barely any. And you've got a lot of people who are coming from Ontario and BC, and they are screwed. I mean, I had an email off a guy last week who's in an Airbnb in Calgary. He's paying $5,000 a month with his family, and he's going back to Ontario because he just can't find a rental and he doesn't want to buy right now. So, it is just absolutely crazy what is happening in the rental market. And it was kind of an eye opener. Obviously, I knew the rental market was shit, but I didn't know it was that shit. It didn't take us long to find a rental because we have good credit. You know, we're in good standing. We got good references, everything like that. We're like the perfect tenants, and that's the best way that you have to keep yourself, in my opinion, to leverage that to your advantage. Because the thing is, there's so little quality tenants out there right now that you can even still negotiate just being a good tenant, because there's so little ones out there. But yeah, it's kind of crazy what's happening, and it's frustrating for me because we are going to have to go into a 1-year lease. I wanted to leave at the end of this year, and now we're going to have to postpone it, and it's likely going to be in the middle of next year, towards the end of next year when we leave now, but you know, in some ways, I'm kind of like, well, at least I can get everything in order by then, because I definitely, whether I go to Mexico, whether I go to Panama, whether I go to Costa Rica, I want to have all the immigration stuff done beforehand and everything like that. So anyway, just interesting. But I got some interesting stories to tell you about the sale of the house and everything that's gone on with it, because just interesting, just really, really interesting. But that'll be in the August live stream. So live Q&A. We moved from Germany 16 years ago. This once so nice country has changed big time now, unaffordable, greedy and has no perspective. We can't wait to spend our retirement in an affordable country. Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, you know, a lot of young people kind of, they don't like the older generations because they've built up so much of this wealth. But really, that ain't their fault. Like, it's not their fault that they built up all that wealth and they're going to be able to retire. I mean, it's such a problem that it looks so bleak for the generations that we have right now compared to the people who are retiring right now. I mean, they're retiring with like massive home equity, you know, stock prices. I mean, they're not far off all-time highs, just kind of crazy. So 401ks, retirement plans, they're all way up there still. So not a bad place to retire. But yeah, I can see why young people, like, there's a friction. There's definitely that friction going between, and that friction in society between different classes and everything like that is just such a bad sign of what's to come. Really is. Tin Finn says, "How are you, Luke?" I'm tired, at least until I have my Panamanian coffee. It's been a tiring day and a tiring week. It seems like one of those weeks that's just dragged on and dragged on. But thank you for asking, and I hope you're all well. Cost of living is insane. It certainly is. It is easier to say the reasons why to live in Canada, because it would be so short. Yeah, junkies on every corner. Yeah, you know, I mean, yeah. What did you think of Farage and Nat West? Yeah, you know what? I've been following that situation. I've been tempted to cover it on the channel. I didn't know whether it would be much interest, to be honest, about it. But yeah, I find that very interesting. Nigel Farage was one of the prominent people when it came to the Brexit. So when the Brexit campaign was going on, he was kind of the front face of that. So it's really interesting. He has a lot of ties to the royal family. He is a royalist. He even says that himself. So yeah, I kind of found it weird that they're trying to unbank him, considering his ties to the royal family and the fact that he's more of a royalist type. And he has a lot, he's more like a common person, even though he's not really like that. He is an elitist like every politician in the UK, but he's more like the average person, and he's more for the average person values which people want. But yeah, what's happening with his banking is just kind of crazy, and I think a sign of what's to come, especially with central bank digital currencies. It's just going to make it very easy to unbank people like Nigel Farage. Now, obviously, his views, I mean, if you look at what he said in European Parliament, it is absolutely hilarious. Some of the things he said have been exactly what the UK people are thinking. So fair play to the guy. But he's just said it to all these bureaucrats, right? And just, it's just absolutely hilarious. You've got to look up some of those clips on YouTube. But yeah, Coots was his bank, which is owned by NatWest, I think. And NatWest is partly owned by the taxpayer still. But, I'm not sure if that's direct ownership, because I believe that stopped like 4 or 5 years ago, like the direct ownership, because all the banks in the UK were bailed out. They had to be bailed out by the taxpayer. And they were all, well, the big ones anyway, they were split up. So Lloyd's TSB became TSB and Lloyd's Bank, and I think another couple of them have split up as well. But yeah, it's really interesting that they're still partly owned by the taxpayer. I couldn't believe that, actually. But you know what? Guess what? All the banks in Canada are partly owned by the taxpayer too, through CPP. So it's no different. It's no different here. I mean, you could call that a shadow bailout if you want, but it's not really. Chrystia Freeland's interpretation of the economy is to cancel Disney Plus. Not good. Yeah, it's the things she has said is just unbelievable. You can't believe that she is actually the finance minister. And I think Pierre has been actually pretty good at exposing just how bad the Liberals have been on the finance side when he's asked basic questions, and they just have no idea. Like, it's just complete radio silence. So what do you think about the digital currency? I think it will be used to usurp power and gain control over people. But in the start of it, it's going to be because low banking fees, or there's going to be some carrot that they're going to dangle in front of everybody, and everybody's going to just trip over each other to go and get it. I mean, we got a problem in Canada because so many people are just slaves to their debt. So ultimately, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They've got little money in their pocket to sustain themselves if there is a crisis. So the government has so much control over those people. It's unbelievable. And that's scary. It's scary, quite frankly, when a government has that much power over its people. And it's because the cost of living has been driven up so much and people are in so much debt. I mean, they literally depend on it. I mean, think about it. If in 2020, the government came in and they said, we got this digital currency, and to get all this stimulus stuff, you've got to sign up to the digital currency. 90% would have signed up. I guarantee you. I mean, we can just see the uptake, the amount of people that were taking the passports and were getting on board with the passport programs. And they were really just the lead up event to what is happening. So what is going to happen, with social scores, with social credit scores or climate scores or whatever form it's going to come into. And yeah, just a disaster in my opinion. But to start with, at least, it's going to be, everything's going to be great. There's going to be some perceived benefit or even reward if you take on this scheme. And they're not even going to call it a central bank digital currency because of the stigma attached to it. It's probably going to be completely something else. Maybe this, I don't know. And I need to look more into the laws on how it works, because I know the Fed, you can't, like US citizens, it's illegal for them to have accounts at the Fed. But I don't know if it's the same with the Bank of Canada. I don't know if those same laws are in place. I would imagine so. But I'll have to check. And if anybody knows, stick it in the chat. Just looking down here. Yeah, so Sheridan says they love socialism and cheap credit. The government will go for hyperinflation before they let deflation happen. Normally, remember the pandemic. I think this is a great point to kind of pick apart the different portions of it, because if you think about what scared them in the pandemic, it was deflation. Oh my God, it was deflation that was the problem. So we need to just go crazy with our monetary policy, which they did then do. And then you saw massive amounts of inflation, and now rates have just gone jacked up. So I don't think, I mean, if they were going to let hyperinflation happen, I mean, inflation is devaluing the currency very slowly. But if they were going to let hyperinflation happen, they wouldn't have increased interest rates. They would have just let things continue the way it was heading. So, I mean, maybe that's their goal, but I don't think so. And you have to remember that during the 1970s, when you had the massive amounts of consumer price inflation, wages were actually going up. Like there was actually a lot of wages, wage price inflation, and that was probably a good thing. But right now, you have real wages that are so far negative. It is unbelievable. And you've got people in incredible amounts of debt. So the fact is, you really cannot have that continue that way, because I think it's obvious what it leads to. It leads to like what's happening in France right now, which is a deterioration of society completely. Civil unrest just goes through the roof. And I think likely we're heading to that at some point, because slowly it's been happening bit by bit. But I think it's been obvious by their actions that they're just, the central bank just has no clue what it's really doing. I mean, it's in a fight for credibility right now. And I think that's why it's raising rates so much, because it wants to prove it's an independent when it really isn't. Because of what happened during the pandemic, it's become obvious the central bank isn't independent because of monetizing the government debt, what the government was doing. It was just a total disaster, and it was obvious and it was exposed. But then obviously with the inflation, the central bank now has to come in and jack up rates, which the government, just think about it. If the government was in charge, they would never do that. I mean, Justin Trudeau does not want really high interest rates. I mean, he just wants to spend as much money as possible, and high interest rates make him have to rein in what he's spending, which he absolutely hates. Plus, you get people who are just pissed off largely with what's going on. And you have the lag effect that plays out, where you actually have the cost of living increasing because the interest rates, and then it's really the collapse that causes the cost of living to come down. So, yeah, I think it's interesting thought anyways, just a different opinion and perspective. Sorry, Luke, but the UK is the same hell as every other free country, quote unquote. Yeah, the UK is in a real depression. I mean, because I go back there every year, and every year it just gets worse and worse. But then living in Canada day to day, because it's so gradual, sometimes you're not going to notice what's happening. And that's what's happened largely with the general public, I believe. It's just that because it happens slowly and they don't go away maybe to other countries. And that's why traveling is so good in a way, because it gives you that different perspective on things. And then you come back and you're like, what? But yeah, it's just interesting, because every government is corrupt at the end of the day. It's just what level of power does that government have over you? Let's see what else everybody is discussing. It's unbelievable what's happening. 40-year housing going for a base price of 600,000. And to a lot of people in Canada, they'd say that was cheap. But it's just absurd. I mean, you can't. I just find it crazy, how when people look at different places, like especially coming out of Ontario, for instance, people would go into all these lower price markets, but they weren't doing any fundamental research, like what the average income was in those areas, anything like that. They were just buying out there because it was cheaper. We can move to a bigger place and it's cheaper. But what is the real fundamental value of it? I mean, in a bubble, that's how you just lose all value. All value just goes out the window because people are just in this psychological mania, which is just real estate. It's just this obsession almost. It's like people are addicted to it. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. It just doesn't happen in other countries as well. Like, even in my home, the UK, people are it's just not talked about as much. Real estate is just not so much of a big talking point. In Canada, such a massive talking point, it's become such a massive part of the economy as well, worryingly. I mean, it's a disaster, really. I mean, I was looking the other day in Calgary, and I think over 30% of the economy now is construction. Like, oh God, it's just, they move from so let's say the energy sector shrank. They moved from that, they moved to something even weaker. It's just, you couldn't make it up, but there we go. Calgary is a beautiful city, and I can't fathom why those, especially in Vancouver, aren't just piling into your market. Well, it depends whether they can find work. That's number one, whether they can actually find a job here. And then the other thing is there just isn't that much employment here. Like the employment situation compared to places like Toronto is just totally different in Calgary. And also the average wages are completely kind of skewed by the fact that you have oil and gas people who make loads of money. Like, they make insane amounts of money. I know people who work up on the gas rigs, and not the gas rigs, but work for the gas industry, and they're up in Grand Prairie. And the amount of money that they're making is insane. But guess what? They're basically they're basically a contractor. So like when the wildfires happen, they don't get paid nothing. And they're just told, you can't work, you don't get paid. So if the work dries up, their money is just gone. It's just stopped. And they are some of the highest earning people in this province. And the thing is, they also live these expensive lifestyles as well because they're making so much money. It's so lucrative whilst the train is going. And then when the train stops, it's like it goes straight off a cliff. And that's why you have that boom and bust. Calgary, I mean, is the city beautiful? I guess you could say it depends what you want out of a city. I mean, I don't really class any city as a beautiful place, in my opinion. I like a lot of the towns in Alberta and different places, but Calgary, not really. And it's just becoming another woke city. The smoke is a significant issue here as well, but that's a problem in Vancouver, but it's more of a problem here as well. It's just going to get worse. But a lot of people are still moving here, but this is just a cycle. This is just a cycle. There are a lot of people moving here right now, and it's just literally, we go from these cycles of people moving here, people leaving. When I arrived here in 2018, everyone was leaving. And I was just like, what is going on? And the city was just totally different. And right now it's everyone coming. And then in a couple of years, it'll be everybody leaving. And this has been a cycle that has gone on since the 1970s. I thought maybe it was just the past 10 years, but no, this has happened for decades and decades and decades in Calgary. So, and it's one of the weakest labor markets in Canada. Let's not forget that. I definitely think it's overvalued now. Like, the real estate is overvalued. It's obvious. Compare it to anywhere else in Alberta. Compare it to Edmonton. And that's because of the people moving here once again. But you go through these boom bust cycles. I just find it fascinating to live in a place and actually see that cycle play out right in front of your eyes. Is crazy. Give us your best guess time frame for a crash. I'm taking it you're talking about a real estate crash. I don't know if you're talking about a stock market crash or a real estate crash. I really think that it's going to be the end of this year, start of next year, around that sort of time is where everything's just going to go wrong. I mean, the yield curve and the bond market is just predicting these massive amounts of rate cuts that are only going to come if something catastrophically goes wrong, especially after all the talk that these central bankers have put on. And the bond market is always right. You know, I said this back in 2021 and people were saying to me, Luke, you are totally wrong. They're never going to raise rates. They're never going to go high on rates. And I was like, you know, the central banks, they follow the bond market. It's not the other way around. And the bond market is saying that they're going to be cutting. What scenario that makes out for real estate, I do think is going to be a crash this time. I mean, especially I've been looking over some articles of recent where people just believe that, you know, they're going into these 1 year, 2 year fixed year rates, and they just believe everything is going to be rosy because rates are going to come down. And I think they are actually right in the respect of rates coming down. But I think, like usual, people don't think of other scenarios that can happen alongside with that. So yeah, rates could be coming down and your house is worth 20% less, or you can't even sell it, and the bank doesn't even want to do a refinance with you, or they want to refinance with you. But you're going to have to pay, you know, 2% more than you're paying right now because they don't want to lend. Because remember, what what interest rates are based on is what the bank wants it to be based on. You know, they base it off the risk-free rate in the bond market. But if risk premiums jump because massive amounts of people are in foreclosure or distress, which they already are with this negative amortization shit, then there's going to be major problems for those people who have put their bets on for the 1 and 2 year rates. They're just going to be hung out to dry. So it's going to be interesting. And, you know, you cannot sit there and say, well, they've done it this way for the past couple of years. Totally fucking different scenario. And Canadians, they really don't understand credit tightening because it didn't really happen in Canada after 2008 because you didn't have the big debt problems. There wasn't so much leverage in the system, and they chose, hey guys, let's lever up. Let's drop the rates to the floor and use this to lever up. And everybody did. And they have leveraged up. But, you know, credit tightening is wild when it happens. The banks just don't want to lend, and it just becomes a totally different environment, you know. So you have to prepare for that, and I don't think people are preparing for that. I mean, I can see why there's FOMO out there. I can 100% see it. I mean, even when we were in Panama, we were looking at different properties, and we came across a couple of things that would have worked well for an investment. And I was nearly like, I felt the urge just because of all the shit that's going on in Canada to buy. And I was just like, you know what? No, I'm not crossing my rules, which is to wait and find out what happens after whatever is going to play out because the yield curve inversion plays out. And that's my rules. So I'm not deviating from that. But I certainly felt the emotional urge compelling me to just buy. At least you have something then. At least you have some physical real estate. But you just don't know what's going to happen. You just can't predict the future. All I can say is that the yield curve is right 9 times out of 10. Maybe it's going to be wrong this time. Who knows? But it certainly doesn't look like it. The economic data is coming out and it's looking shit. It's looking diabolical. So yeah, probably end of this year. But a crash could last 10 years. It could last 2 years. That's the thing. How long is the crash going to last? I mean, it could be 20 years. Like, we don't really know how long it will continue for. And what I found hilarious was Panama's real estate market took a hit like everywhere in the world during 2008, pretty much, bar a couple of countries like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. But places that were definitely benefiting from all the bad lending practices and the real estate frenzy that had spilled out into other countries, including Panama, they felt what happened afterwards, which was this decline, right? And the real estate contact that we had was really, really interesting because he's been in the real estate market a long time. And he was saying there's still people trying to sell their house in Panama for 2008 prices, even though, you know, the prices are nowhere near what they were in 2008 right now. They've gone down, they've gone up a little bit, you know, they've gone up and down over time, but they're nowhere near what they were in that 2008 frenzy. But people have been sat in denial for that long. I was just like, what? I was just like, so people have had their property on the market like over 10 years. And he was like, yeah, people have had their property. Because it's that illiquid in countries like that, in Panama, Costa Rica, and even in Mexico. But when the market is operating irrationally and it's detached and decoupled from fundamentals and it's in this bubble, people think, there'll always be a bid. There'll always be somebody here. Nothing could go wrong. But, you know, it was eye-opening to see what was going on with real estate there. And, you know, Costa Rica was an interesting thing as well, because the Costa Rican banks have thought this is a great time to get involved with financing for expat gringos. So, so you can get a loan and buy a home in Costa Rica from a bank. So no wonder the price is a difference, because in Panama, the banks will not loan money to you. They're not getting into that. So it's provided a little bit of stability there, but it's just interesting to see the differences. And obviously in Mexico, there's a lot of developer financing which is going on right now because people can't afford to buy their homes in these bubble areas. So now it's developer financing, which is like the final stage. But, you know, crazy stuff. When you look at bubbles in various places, I think that's when you realize the narratives are just complete horseshit. You know, when you're looking at the United States, you're looking at Mexico, you're looking at Costa Rica, you're seeing all the same trends, and people are telling you it's this, it's that, Luke, and you're seeing the market just go the same way. And I'm like, wake up. Like, it's human brains, it's human psychology. That's what's driving the market. When it's in a bubble, it's not coupled to fundamentals, it's irrational. So it's definitely hard to call tops and bottoms. So could be wrong on the timing of that, but that you asked for my best guess, and that's it. Thank you, Coach Junior, for the super chat. Good work, Luke. Canada is done. Saving for Mexico. Good plan. And, you know, if anybody's thinking of jobs or something like that, job ideas, you know, English teaching is a really good one. Like globally, English teaching is one you can get. And if you can get credentials for it, sets you apart from everybody else, allows you to earn more money. That's something you can do as a digital nomad, and there's large demand for that globally, and you can do it virtually. It's something that can be done virtually over Zoom. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Oh man, why does it keep bouncing up like that? The cabinet shuttles. Oh, some of the stuff you guys say is hilarious, and I can't repeat it because it would probably get me. There'd probably be a service interruption. Oh, Bucerías, Puerto Vallarta, love it. I love that area. I think it's a really great area. Mexico, you know, you got, because like places like Quintana Roo are like the worst places in Mexico. Yeah, that area of Mexico specifically is so nice, and yeah, I'm jealous of you. We're actually looking right now, we're debating where we're going to go in the winter to escape the horrific weather in Calgary, which will come in the winter and the long winters. And we were thinking Puerto Vallarta, Bucerías, because yeah, you can just get, I don't know, I just love it there. It's really nice. We're also thinking Costa Rica, but I don't know if we can be bothered. I just want to go relax in December. Mexico, you don't need residential insurance. I didn't know that. What the hell? Mexican cartels waiting for you all. Oh man, that is yeah, I mean the cartels definitely operate, but yeah, I mean they're operating in Canada and the United States too. Believe me, there's organized crime here. The drugs are all heading to the expats. I mean, that's why in like a lot of touristy areas, the tourists obviously want the demand for the drugs. That's why the cartels are there. It's just kind of crazy. And most of the drugs is heading up to the US and Canada because that's where the demand is. So it's kind of crazy. Can't blame the migrants. It's the lenders and politicians' fault. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, Merida, Mexico is the safest city in Mexico. Lots of expats live there. Yeah, it's a beautiful city. It really is. But I didn't find it like any safer than any other city that I've been to in Mexico, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's crime statistics that say so, and that's a lot of reason why Mexicans have moved there and expats have moved there. But yeah, real estate is incredibly overvalued in that area. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Playa del Carmen is cheaper than Cozumel. Cozumel is Cozumel is a beautiful island. Yeah, that is a really nice place. Playa del Carmen's a nice place, but it's too touristy. Quintana Roo is just it's like the dump of Mexico. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are beautiful beaches there and the Caribbean landscape, everything like that is amazing, but the tourists just ruin the place. I could never live in a place like that. And it's just being exploited. And also there's a lot of cartel activity there because of the tourists. And I saw today that 3,500 a month to retire now. That's what they're saying. It's absolutely insane. I mean, can you blame people for leaving the country, like who are retiring, when you consider, like, I was talking to a colleague the other week and he was saying that he was paying like over $1,000 a month for his property taxes and home insurance, because home insurance is incredibly expensive in certain parts of Calgary, or in most of Calgary, I don't know, but in certain parts specifically because of the hail. But the hail is really a problem for the whole city now as well. I mean, we get a lot of hail down here in the southwest where we are. Just going down. Yeah, the seaweed is a problem on the Caribbean side. Yeah, that's what we said. Yeah, we were just like, yeah, this is just going to get worse and worse. It's like the wildfire smoke. I mean, I don't understand why anybody would move here considering the smoke situation to the west in Canada, because it's just so bad. It's just going to get worse. Like in 20 years, it's going to be even worse. So it's the same with the seaweed situation in that part of Mexico. It is just getting worse and is only going to get worse in the future. Cancun doesn't get affected by it, though, for some bizarre reason, but there's a massive current that goes through there. Opinion on the UK grocery store. Which grocery store in the UK is requiring a QR code to enter? I didn't even realize that. What's your opinion on Portugal? Think it's a good country to move to? I mean, there's a lot of buzz about it online. Portugal is a nice country. It's not a place I would move to because it's cold. I mean, like, Europe is very far north. People don't realize that. But so the winters in Portugal, they're not that great. They're pretty gloomy and rainy and cold. Yeah, not a place I would go to retire, really. I want to retire somewhere hot. Can the banks keep increasing amortization periods forever and not have an impact on the long term? No, no, they can't. Because it is going to have an impact on their earnings. If people aren't paying back their loans, then all their original projections for the money that they were going to make are going to be completely wrong. Now, obviously, they can fudge their earnings for so long, and I explained this in a prior video. But, yeah, like increasing amortizations, it cannot continue forever. And the other shoe, which will drop, is the labor market. And when that drops, it's just going to be absolute disaster. I mean, as a creditor, all they're doing is extending people who are in distress, essentially, because they can't afford to pay the principal on their mortgage. They're extending them more credit and more credit and more credit. And then they're charging interest on that credit that they're extending them at the high interest rate. So it's just a terrible situation, which can make their earnings look better in the short term, but is a complete disaster in the long run. And the hilarious thing is, the regulators, the central bank, the government have all admitted that this is a bad long-term plan, and yet nobody is doing anything about it. And I think it's obvious why. Again, it comes back to this self-responsibility thing. There's just this zero responsibility culture, especially within government, that is, I don't want to be blamed. I don't want to be blamed. I'm not taking ownership of this issue. I don't want to be blamed for the housing market crash. So, we're just going to let it unravel on its own and wait until the public is begging us to come in and bail out the system, and then we'll come in. Yeah, absolutely insane. Thank you. Thank you for your support, Harry. Man, why does it keep flipping? What's your prediction on prime in the next 6 months? What do you think the breaking point is for the plus 20% of mortgage holders in Canada? Well, the breaking point is what I've said many times. It's going to be job losses. So you got to watch the unemployment like a hawk. It seems like it's bottom, but we'll wait to see. Prime, I don't really think in terms of prime interest rates, but if we look at the base interest rate that the central bank is setting, the overnight interest rate, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, 4% maybe. I mean, who knows? Like they'll just hold rates until it all falls apart. So to kind of predict is very difficult, the timing of these things, especially when you're in such a irrational market. The only way I come up with some sort of forecast of timings is based on prior history, based on liquidity bottlenecks that typically happen at different times of the year, like the one that we had in the spring with the banking crisis and everything that happened in the US. Credit Suisse failed as well. So, it wasn't just contained to the US, it was a liquidity shortage. And now nothing has improved since that liquidity shortage, and nothing has changed essentially. In fact, everything has just got worse. The Fed has not solved the problem at all with this bank term funding program. So, it's just going to get worse. And then we've got more liquidity bottlenecks when people are changing things in their portfolio, and it just causes a shortage of liquidity and major problems from that. So I don't really know. I mean, 6 months, that would put us out in, we're in July now, so that would put us in January. Yeah, that's right at the sort of time frame when I think shit is going to hit the fan. So I don't know. It could be at the same rate we're at right now, and who knows? Yeah. But I do think rates are coming down definitely next year. I believe rates are going to be coming down. I believe it's going to be because shit is hitting the fan. I believe it's going to be because everything is unraveling. You know, the yield curve is predicting it. I'm even betting. I'm out there actively betting capital on that. Actually, I'm actually betting on rates coming down. Now, I don't know when exactly they're going to come down. I don't know 100% whether they are going to come down anyway. But I just think that the probabilities are tilted in my favor in this trade. So that's why I'm doing it. So I do believe rates are coming down. Timing of that, it's a different story. Well, according to the Expat Insider, yeah, Philippines was on there too. I'm trying to remember who else. Panama was in the top 10. I mean, if you go to Internations, they break it down by whatever you value the most. So you can look at crime, you can look at the personal finance index, and you can look what are the best countries. You know, it's hard to apply like a one size fits all approach when it comes to people moving countries, because so many different people just have different goals when it comes to moving to a country. So it depends what people are after. Like, do you want the best healthcare in the world? Then it's probably not going to be Latin America. You're probably going to have to go to some place in Asia, like Malaysia. Kuala Lumpur looks like an amazing place and something I've been looking into as well. And then, you know, if crime is your main thing, you're going to have to look into other places. So, but yeah, check out Internations and their Expat Insider. I got an interesting video coming on Sunday, which is about climate scores. I finally edited some of the videos that I did when I was back in the UK, which was in May. God, that was months ago. Yeah, 100%. Great channel. There should be, thank you for that. There should be zero poverty and very little tax in Canada. Such a vast country with natural resources, so much land, such a small population. What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, totally agree. Greed, corruption, that's what's wrong with it. Probably inherited from the British and the French, because they're both incredibly corrupt, and you know, corruption has been a big part of their history, both the French and the British. Thank you, Gordon, so much for the super chat. I'll put it into the drone fund. I'm saving to buy a drone. They're so expensive for the channel. Pick my comment. There you go, Dave. What will Canada look like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Well, I don't think a good place. Otherwise, I wouldn't be leaving, because leaving a country is a long-term decision. So I don't think it's going to be in a better state than it's in right now. I mean, even if you have this massive deflationary event that we think is coming, which will be like a Great Depression, that could last for 10, 20 years. So, I mean, we still have the problems from 2008 right now that haven't been solved. So it's just kind of mad. Should immigrants take Canadian citizenship if they come from BRICS nations? Should we start investing in countries like Brazil, India, Africa? I mean, if the countries allow dual citizenship, take the passport. The passport's an asset to have. I mean, I think it's going to be, the Canadian passport will become more of an asset, actually, because immigrants just aren't going to stay to meet the criteria to fill the citizenship requirements, because they're not going to be able to sustain themselves because the cost of living is just out of control. Yeah, it's just kind of crazy. I mean, I was speaking to an immigration consultant a couple of years ago, and he was telling me how the Trudeau Liberals had promised that they were going to waive all the fees for citizenship or something like that. And he said like so many people were holding off doing citizenship because of that, and it still hasn't happened. But it just makes me think like, how bad are their finances if they're holding off for that? Because who's going to hold off for a Trudeau promise? Thank you so much, Jacob, for the super chat. Again, I'll put it in the drone fund. But yeah, I think getting any residency is going to be an asset. I think if you are Canadian, you only hold a Canadian passport, you should look into getting some other residency, because a lot of countries, you only have to be in the country 24 hours to satisfy the residency requirement. So you can just keep renewing your residency. But I think a lot of these countries that have lax residency requirements probably going to disappear, and they have been disappearing. So, I mean, Panama has got especially more tight when it comes to their residency program now. Mexico is probably going to follow suit. Costa Rica is becoming tighter as well. So, and a lot of that comes down to perception of the general public, is again that they think the immigrants coming are the reason that prices are going up. I don't know why. That it just seems to be the easiest target. It's funny because every country, and they're blaming the same thing. Okay. Yeah, Nicaragua, or Nicaragua, I don't know how you say it, is fairly good, not stable, lots of mafia. Yeah, I've looked into it. The internet's a bad thing. The cost of living is insanely low there. But yeah, it's a third world country. It's definitely a third world country with a lot of third world country problems. But I mean, so is Panama and Costa Rica. Panama is incredibly corrupt, has lots of problems. And Costa Rica is the same. But it depends where you want to go at the end of the day. Yeah, you know what? Talking of that, I'm going to pull up a chart because I remember seeing earlier that the Canadian dollar was down significantly against the Mexican peso again. God, I mean, this is literally must be destroying people who are out there. So it closed down 1.3%. So right at the low. So let me share my screen here and then share this. So even though it closed flat against the US dollar, you can see this is a daily chart. Each candle represents a day of trading. And you can see here, we've closed right down at the low. Like this is the low. And if we expand it out to a monthly chart, yeah, I don't know what happened. Oh, there we go. So you can see we're going all the way back to 2015 levels, 2013 levels, 2010 levels. So, I mean, the Mexican peso is incredibly strong, but it's not just the Mexican peso. I mean, even if you look at the Costa Rican colon, for example, I mean, that has, look at the decline. This is a monthly chart. So from 2022, just boom, just right down. So yeah, insane. I haven't looked at Canadian, Chinese, yuan, pretty much flat. I don't know what the hell that is. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, the great Canadian peso. I mean, yesterday, if you went to a country that was US dollars, you would have been screwed. This year, it's like the Mexican peso. But I mean, people like if they moved in 2021, they're looking at like 60 to 80% increases in their cost of living. It's just absolutely insane. And the US hasn't fared any better against the Mexican peso either. It held up better last year when the DXY was much stronger. And the DXY is still strong. In fact, let's bring that up right now. Because a lot of people talk about, the dollar is ending and everything like that. But I think it's important. So this is the DXY. So it's the dollar versus a basket of currencies. You can actually see it's coming down to this monthly support right now. It's going to be interesting to see if we rebound off that. But it's still at 101. Like, that is strong. Like, look, going back historically, that is the strongest level since the early 2000s. So to say that the dollar is dying, I mean, long term, yes. But that's just another narrative that I believed is used to like just drum up a load of fear. And really, the US dollar's going to go higher, in my opinion. I don't know when, but during this crisis, it will likely go higher because it will be another dollar shortage crisis. And the dollar is the reserve currency, not by like a dictator. It's by the free market. People choose to basically use dollars. And even though these BRICS countries are doing different trade deals and everything like that, a lot of them still, their currencies pegged against the US dollar. So anyway, I get it, because like the US empire is in its down cycle, but I just think some people like thinking like as if it's 20 years ahead, and maybe I'm going to be wrong on that. I mean, maybe I'm going to be proved wrong on that. I have no idea, but will there be some kind of mass revolt in Canada? Yeah, I mean, if people can't afford to put food on the table, put a roof over their head, that is going to lead to civil and social unrest. And then you just wait for a trigger event. And then when that trigger event happens, it can be anything, all hell can break loose very, very quickly. Things can escalate. I mean, it's just unbelievable what's happening in France. And it's not even being covered in the mainstream media. $6,400 property taxes in Hamilton, Ontario. Wow. That is, Jesus. That is crazy. Keith is paying $3,400 in property taxes. You got the good deal. Aldi, wow, okay. That's a German supermarket chain. In fact, they're in the US, so I wonder whether they're doing the same in the US as well. They're in the East Coast. I don't think they're in the West Coast. They're when they expanded into the US, it didn't go so well. But I believe they've still got stores there. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the future. I mean, just look at China and the QR codes, the social credit scores. Thank you so much, Cameron, for your kind words. Gives me the motivation to keep going here. That's the beauty of Japan. No citizenship. They preserve what they have built. Or someone said someone had a good question, but I must have missed it. I didn't see that person's name. Why would the smoke get worse? Well, the fires are just getting progressively worse because it's just getting drier. Now, whether you believe, like the ice caps are all melting. So, I mean, not the ice caps, the glaciers. If you go to the mountains and look how far the glaciers are receding, so that is a cooling. And even when you stand next to that glacier, you can feel the cool coming off it. So they act as like the air conditioning for the West. And as that melts, and whether you believe that's because of humans or whether you believe that's just a natural cycle of the planet, I don't really care. But the fact is, once those are gone, and as those recede even more, things are just going to heat up and dry out, and you're going to be left with more fires. So that's why the smoke's going to get worse. especially here in Canada. I mean, this is why it's happening more in Canada. I mean, if you look at the US, for example, this is all going to be desert in probably 100 years. Like where I am right now in Alberta will probably be desert. All the water that's coming out of the mountains right now from the glaciers melting, that'll mostly be gone. So it's just kind of crazy, but yeah. Slowly, that's what's happening. The deserts are just expanding and expanding and expanding. Oh, another loot. Oh, shit, I missed it. Luke, what is happening with Canadian banks, especially Nova Scotia? Oh, you mean Scotiabank? I was thinking, what are you on about with Scotiabank? I'm not sure what you're referring to, but Canadian banks specifically are extending amortizations. They have massive amounts of risk. So Scotiabank in particular is one of the more riskier banks. It's more into emerging markets. It's also one of the banks. Yeah, I know BMO is. I'm pretty sure it's Scotiabank is the second bank. There's two Canadian banks that are in China, and one is BMO 100%, and I think the other one is Scotiabank. So, you know, the amount of risk all these Canadian banks share is sort of equal in a way. Some of them have a lot more risk when it comes to mortgages, like CIBC, but then BMO has a lot more risk when it comes to derivatives. So pick your poison. These banks are all just full of it, full of poison. Generally, when rates come down, the stock market actually goes down. If you look at what happened in 2020 in particular, the stock market didn't actually start going up until they announced the fiscal. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this, especially with the bond market. Because if the fiscal comes in and the bond yields just shoot off, then yeah, you got major problems. And don't believe that the central banks actually control the yield curve, because as you can see right now, they have no control over it, because look how inverted it is. I mean, you've got the 5-year at 4%. Like it's more than 100% inverted, so 100 basis points inverted, sorry. It's a long day. Oh, God. Buying real estate in Canada right now is super risky. If the Liberals hold power, we will be looking at capital gains taxes on primary residence. I mean, yeah, there's that. There's so many economic headwinds, the yield curve inversion, the fact that you're getting 5% just to sit in cash and go to government bonds, treasuries, GICs, whatever you fancy, you're getting that 5%, which is pretty much risk-free. It's not worth it. It's not worth taking the risk on real estate. It really isn't. Thank you for the super chat. Market Mania drone on. Pierre has been making comments recently stating that Canada built more homes in 1972 than in 2022. Population has doubled. Yeah, but if you look at the population on the actual trend, it's just stayed pretty much the same. I mean, it may have increased slightly. And if you look at housing starts right now, they're right at the highs. You know, and again, like, you've got to be so careful when it comes to politicians as well. Even Pierre, I mean, yeah. So anyways, that's all I'll say on that. But yeah, essentially what you're saying there is that the population has doubled and they built more homes in the 1970s than they do now. So it's obviously to do with population. And I don't disagree with you. Well, I think that's what you're saying anyway. I don't disagree with you in terms of the population growth definitely contributes. You need a lot of homes. But we build a lot of homes in Canada. And also you can't go after like a national market and start talking about real estate supply when it's very different when you look at different cities. For example, Calgary is like building an entirely new city right now on the outskirts, whereas Toronto might not be doing that, or places in BC might not be doing that, and they might not have built any homes for like 20 years. I have no idea. So, you can't apply this one size fits all when it comes to housing supply. And he just harps on and on about housing supply. It's getting really boring. And if a politician is banging on about it, then you guaranteed pretty much that they're probably wrong on what they're talking about. And yeah, we do need to build more homes. I think that will definitely help alleviate the problem. But then again, if you just get tons of speculators buying those homes because the banks stack it in a way that makes it advantageous that they can buy versus the average person, then how is that going to affect anything? It's not going to affect anything. You're just going to have more and more Airbnbs. But what could change the demand? Recession, job loss, all these different things. Yeah, dual passports is a must to escape entrapment. Yeah, I mean, somebody said talk about gold and bricks, I think they're referring to. And I did touch on it for a bit with what's going on with the BRICS nations and saying that the dollar is failing and the dollar is ending. And, I think gold is really insurance on government stupidity. Every time you see the government come out and do stupid things when it comes to fiscal common sense that they should have, and they obviously don't have, you see gold shooting up. So I think gold is really insurance. I don't see it as an inflation hedge. You can kind of say that just because if you look historically, it's performed better than inflation. But, yeah, I mean, that's what I think of gold. You can speculate on gold when it comes to miners. I own some of the miners, which pay decent dividends, some of the big ones. But yeah, that's if you believe gold prices are going to go up, obviously. I think gold prices will come down in the crisis. It's always what's sold in a stock market crash, in a liquidity event. Everybody rushes to sell what is liquid, and that will be your gold, that will be your oil, that will be all your commodities. And that's why you see them go down so much. And gold is usually the first one to rise from the ashes. And gold went down about 20% in 2020 during the stock market crash. Luke, when will the first Canadian bank crash like the Silicon Valley Bank? I don't think they would ever crash in that way, because the Canadian banks are bigger when it comes down to it. And I don't think it will happen in the same way as Silicon Valley Bank, but anything's possible. And I don't know when either. Like, it's impossible to predict the timing of when one of the banks is going to blow up or need a bailout or need some sort of funding program from the Bank of Canada to keep itself going. But I just really hope that when that day comes, they break up the bank into different sections, and it just gets liquidated and the money gets returned to the people who deposited there. I don't believe bailouts are a good thing. They just create moral hazard. I mean, 2008 is a great example of that. Look where we are right now. Because there was bank bailouts in 2008, the IMPP, you can look that up. just moved to Niagara Falls, US. You think I should buy a house here? Still kind of expensive compared to a couple of years ago. Yeah, I mean, we were discussing about those houses. So I've looked around. I mean, it depends on your rent range. Just check out your rent range, factor in like a 20%, 30% drop in rent. Or if there is good data, there's usually a lot more data when it comes to different things than in Canada, in the US, which makes no sense because when you look at how expensive real estate is in Canada, you think we would be full of data, brimming with data, and we just have no data. So look at the historical rents and how volatile they've been, and then just check out the rent range when you buy the property. I mean, certainly properties are not in a bubble in upstate New York by the looks of it when I've been looking, and we've done different streams on this channel when you compare them to income. And it also depends on what you want to do. I mean, it sounds like you're a little bit more risk off if you're not buying and you haven't jumped into that boat immediately. So maybe just wait and see what happens when the yield curve plays out. I mean, worst comes to worst, prices go up a little bit and you end up buying at a lesser interest rate, so your payment's less anyways. So, that's what I would do. Anyway, it's up to you in the end, but that's just what I would do. And I'm no genius or anything like that. I just want to be clear, as you all know and understand, I'm sure. Oh, crap. I just lost my place. Oh, I had a great question, I think, something to do with Calgary, and I've lost it. God damn it. Yeah, there you go. There's Robert's picks of the banks. I'm not sure if that's from best to worst or worst to best. Thanks, D-Man. Thank you, Pioneer Spirit. Nice to have you here. Well, we might as well just head it up to 2 hours since we're nearly there already. And then I'll leave you all in peace to enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thanks so much. It's such an honor to be able to have this platform and to be able to speak to similar people who have similar mindsets to that of myself. I mean, it really is honestly amazing, and I can't believe the growth of the channel. I honestly don't believe that. I mean, I was making videos in a parking lot using this channel as just a vent, essentially, because I was just so pissed off that, it seemed like nobody out there was thinking in like just logical terms, just using logic. It just seemed like everybody was caught up in this mania back in 2021. And I was just like, I had all this energy about it. And, my girlfriend, she got sick and tired of listening to me. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go do videos in a parking lot when I was getting up at 4 a.m. because I get up 4 a.m. every day because I trade, and then I have a day job, and my background is engineering, and then I do this on top of that. So I work like freaking a dog right now, but you have to in this environment. You have to, because you have to just be as diversified as you possibly can. And it's just a blessing really that I can come here and we can have these discussions. And maybe in the future ones, what I'll get is actually people to come on live with me. I think that might even work better than the format of just me going through the questions. Everybody who's watched these live streams knows that this question comes up every time. What's my view on cryptocurrency? And my view doesn't really matter. Let's just start off with that. I just want to make that clear. But my view, if you're asking on what, like, I'm not a big proponent of cryptocurrency. Like, I just believe that everybody seems to be investing in it because they think the price will go up. And it has an amazing trend, and it has these amazing booms and then these amazing reversions. And you know what the problem is for me? I just, yeah, I just can't bring myself to do it because, in essence, to me, it seems too much like a Ponzi scheme. And obviously, when you've got people, largely, majority of people are investing in it because they want to get rich, because they want to make money. I mean, if you just took away that incentive, then what do you think Bitcoin's value? Like, if you said you can't make any money, like it's impossible to book gains on Bitcoin, the price is not going to be what the price is today. So people are buying it because they think the value of it will go up. But the thing is, yeah, I just think it's risky. Like, I do think there's risk there. It's relatively new. I like things that have a lot of historical data so we can go over and look at the past and see what's happened in the past to try and figure out the probabilities of the future. You know, Bitcoin was after the great financial crisis. We don't really know how it behaves in a depression. In fact, we don't know. So, you know, it's incredibly risky. And a lot of the time it's just following risk assets. That's the other thing. So, you know, I think crypto has a certain power to a certain extent, and it does have a good use case as well. And I think the technology is good. I do think the decentralization of money with cryptocurrency is great. I just think the marketing and all the Ponzi schemes, and you have to separate like crypto and Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin is different, but you know, cryptocurrency, it's just kind of insane. So we'll see what happens. And you know, my views may change as the future goes on. I mean, if I see an opportunity to buy something and I see a trade setting up there, then I might buy it because I think it goes up in price in the future. But it's very difficult for me to calculate any sort of trade on Bitcoin because you just don't have that historical data. You don't know how it's going to behave. So you're just trying to extrapolate a trend, and it's extremely volatile as well. So that's all I'll say on that. That doesn't mean it doesn't go to $1 million, $100,000 or whatever. But, you know, a lot of people have a lot of FOMO when it comes to well, they did have a lot of FOMO when it came to cryptocurrency in 2021, and that's why the price of it went so high. Hey, Luke, love the work. Thank you so much for your support. Was curious if there's any place in Europe that caught your eye to live. Lots of beautiful places in the old country. Thanks. It depends. If you're retiring, then obviously taxes aren't going to be such a big deal to you. So it depends if you're retiring or not. But there's loads of good places you could go retire, like Italy, you know, Malta, Greece, Cyprus. I mean, there's so many places that, but if you're actually going to, because you want to start a business, you want your business to be based there, or you want that to be your location for a certain amount of time. Montenegro looks good. I like Serbia and all these other Balkan countries, not Balkan countries. No, is that right? It is Baltic countries. I don't know. My brain is getting fried now. Oh, gosh. But yeah, anyways, Montenegro, I think, is good. You know, Malta is obviously advantageous, but it's incredibly expensive. Trying to think of other places. There's so many beautiful places I've been to in Europe as well, like Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia are some of the most beautiful places steeped in history that I've ever been in my life. You know, Greece is the Greek islands are just insane. A lot of these places have got overvalued in terms of real estate because you have the same capital flows and movements that happen with the United States, people going to Mexico, Costa Rica, all these other places, as you have in Europe, people going from Germany, UK, and they're going to, you know, all these other countries, driving up the cost of real estate. I mean, Portugal, real estate prices have gone up by incredible amounts, and I think they're pretty much at all-time highs again. We have been saying we're in a real estate bubble since 2007. Yeah, and that's because it's true. But it wasn't very extreme back then. So it was very easy to, allow a continuation of that bubble. And interest rates were on a downtrend. I mean, pretty much from 2007, interest rates just went down. They were in this downtrend. They did go up during those periods, but they just went down to a lower low, lower low, lower low. And now you finally had it shoot back up to a higher high. We broke out of that trend. That doesn't mean that interest rates aren't going to come down again. It just means I doubt they're going to come down to the lows that we saw during the pandemic and stay there for any great deal of time. I mean, we could certainly see a double bottom because, again, interest rates, it boils down to exactly the same thing as everything. Like I say, it's psychology. So you can see the same pattern, couldn't you? You could see them drop rates to the floor. So it goes back down to zero. You get a double bottom. Then inflation goes off again wildly. And then they're jacking up rates. They're going even higher. So, who knows what the future holds. But it's just interesting how those patterns can play out that you see play out in stocks all the time. I mean, just for example, just show you this real quick. I mean, you can see right here, this is a monthly chart. Here's a double bottom right here. So came up, came back down, shot back up here, retested this low right here, and then went right up. And then you can see as well that this low was actually a previous high back there. But, because people saw the double bottom, a lot of people here would have been saying, hey, this is an indicator to buy, and they were right, and then it went up. Not always right, but it's a pattern of psychology. I just thought that was interesting because I had that chart up on that screen. So, but yeah. It's like in financial markets, I just trade patterns. That's all I trade. All I need to see is price. I don't need to see volume. I don't need to see technical indicators. I don't need to see any of that. All I need to see is price. And obviously I need to know about market events because they can produce insane amounts of volatility when different data points are dropped. But the fact is, the psychological patterns I see still play out. So for example, like you'll have a piece of data dropped, but the price will go right to a previous high. So it's like the market pushed it to that point, and now's the test. The data comes out, bam, and then it's not what the market expects, and back down it comes. Or it was above what the market expects, and it just rushes off. But I think in a lot of cases, regardless of what happens with the data, it would do exactly the same thing. It's just, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, and I see that play out all the time. And that's what makes me laugh so much because, Bloomberg and the financial markets, I mean, the financial press, they're always coming out and saying, hey, the stock market's up because of this. The stock market's down because of this. And they'll constantly update and change the narrative throughout the day of why it's up and why it's down. It's because they have no fucking idea. That's what it really comes down to. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you so much for being on this live stream and everything like that. I wanted to let you know as well that I have partnered, well, I haven't partnered with, I'm now affiliated with ExpressVPN. So the link is going to be in the description. So if you're in the market for a VPN, check out that link. It helps the channel. They don't pay me to say anything about it. I approached them actually because they're the VPN provider I use. And, with everything that's happening with the government trying to control what we watch and see, I just think VPNs are incredibly important. So that's why I've become affiliated with them. I want to thank you so much for being on this live stream. Honestly, it's an honor to be here and be able to do this. It's just incredible. I want to thank you so much for your kindness, your generosity in the comments section, the fact that people have done super chats and everything. All the money will go towards the drone and hopefully we'll get it soon, and I'll be able to show you how much building is going on in Calgary because it is going to blow your mind, although I have to check the red tape and regulations on whether I need a fucking pilot or something to fly a drone in this goddamn city. I have no idea, but I would probably guess so. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Friday, and I will see you in the video on Sunday, even though it won't be a live stream. Then we'll be back on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I got Airbnb stuff planned for next week, stuff about the CBA loans and the 250,000 businesses that could potentially go bust. So yeah, stay tuned. Thank you so much. I love you all. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.